component. We're also having to deal with wildfires. We're going to be dealing with saltwater intrusion into the delta, heat events it's interesting when we look at heat events in California. You think about how damn hot it gets in the Central Valley right now. Where we're going to face the worst problem is going to be San Francisco and the places that the climate is mild, because we are totally unprepared. We just aren't used to it. We don't have the facilities. So there's a whole range of things we need to be looking at, and water security is just one of them.
This gentleman here.
I wanted to ask Todd about why your portfolio seems so weak on rooftop solar, combined with storage, some sort of battery storage, to get you through the night. It's right in the middle where your demand is. We don't have to move. Then you add the plug-in electric cars to that equation. It seems like a perfect marriage.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we actually have a program on integration of renewables, storage, and plug-in electrics. Again, just looking, this is kind of taking from the grid perspective, from the utility perspective. So if you're going to have rooftop solar with a battery storage and a plug-in electric, that essentially looks like demand reduction from the grid, from the utility perspective. So this really isn't accounted for specifically as a line item in these models, because it's almost seen as energy efficiency from the grid. So that's why it doesn't show up in these models, but that's definitely something we have our eye on, and we definitely see it as a major opportunity as well, particularly in areas like California and the Southwest.
Does that let you back off some of the generation of fossil fuel production?
That's where we're looking into. In our regional model, we'll be taking into account the opportunities for distributed generation as well, so that we'll see that more in that demand reduction piece of the pie when we show the regional model. And again, that'll likely be in the Southwest or Western regional model.
Thanks.
Gentleman in the back.
So actually, Pat's question fed right into mine. I was going to ask the same thing. I thought I heard you say that. But even then, okay, so on solar, you're saying that if we do local, distributed generation, that doesn't count specifically as solar, but rather as demand reduction, which was your top slice. But what about utility scale solar, which is actual generation at centralized power plants, which has a lot of potential? There's some controversy because in some places it's desecrating, wildlands or whatever, but there's also a lot of real estate out there that, in truth, nobody really cares a lot about. Anyway, why were you all not saying much about utility scale solar, and on the other hand, quite a bit about nuclear?
Right, and so this is based off of, that's an important caveat, actually, an important note. This doesn't take into account tax credits or policy incentives. So this is based off strictly off cost of energy on a kilowatt hour basis over the lifetime of the facility, based off the kind of projections that we've seen or that we're using. So without taking into account tax credits or policy incentives and other drivers like renewable portfolio standards, which kind of make the cost not really a part of the question, then solar doesn't necessarily compete as well with other renewables or with the more centralized systems. You do start to see it, however, in the regional models.
Yes.
This is for Will. You had mentioned the hundreds of county municipalities and agencies that have authority over the bay. Do you see any movement to try to get a more regional authority that can start implementing some of these things you talked about?
The question is, are we moving toward a regional authority? I mentioned this cooperative agreement of 4 regional agencies, which is done under state law, but it is a voluntary cooperation. I don't see us moving toward any overarching regional authority. Basically, the concept of home rule is it's almost, well, it is written into the Constitution. And whenever you start to depart from that, there is Tahoe saving San Francisco Bay, saving the California coast, and the bond acts that we passed. I don't think you can look at CEQA and say this has really caused some substantial environmental advancement. It has prevented some bad things from happening, but it has really ensured that what gets built is either what is really well financed or something that is proposed by somebody who's really patient and has a long attention span, it prevents as much or more good development as it stops, as it allows to go forward. So the concern is that now somebody wants to do something out here, and the neighbors say, well, we're concerned about traffic, we're concerned about shadows, and we look at BCDC's maps and it shows that this area is vulnerable to flooding, and they will file a CEQA challenge and delay the approval of the project and force the developer to come up with mitigation measures, maybe something that goes over the windows if it would flood, that makes the project infeasible. So I wouldn't rely on CEQA to end up causing the right thing to happen.
We have time for one more question. I'm going to go with this gentleman in the back. Michael Clausen actually is the executive director of Actera, who's a partner with us.
Question for Todd. Todd, in your models of the cost, the future costs, you didn't build in, you said, at least not yet, the cost of doing nothing. And that seems to me a critical factor that you have to include. I know that you have to have a lot of assumptions, so there could be a lot of variables there. But without the cost of doing nothing factored in, it's very hard to get new policy. And it's very hard to get politicians to support changes. Because they say, well, renewables and all these new energy sources are going to be more costly. Let's stay the course.
Yeah, no, it's a question that comes up often as far as, what about the cost of doing nothing? What are the expected impacts? And I think that there are many research groups, there are many organizations, many agencies working on that, but that's just hasn't something that we've, until there's probably agreed upon model from our perspective, we're trying to stay out of the prediction game and more of the technology, and stay more into the technology and science game. But it's definitely a valid question.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys very much, Todd and Will, for joining us today.
Thanks
and
for
a round
having
of applause, everyone. Thank you for coming as well. If there's more food in the back and you want to help yourself, or is it gone? Go ahead and help yourself to it. And thanks very much for coming. Don't forget to pick up a Greenway flyer if you haven't gotten one. Hand it out to some people who might want to take the training or get a free audit. Thanks again.
So one other thing, there's plenty of extra